shark, do 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 do. Baby shark, do 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 do.
The Umbrella Academy has come to a close with its final season now streaming on Netflix. This is going to be a slightly spoiler-filled review as I'm going to talk about certain things that eventually happen towards the end of the season. And so without further ado, if you haven't seen it, click off if you want to watch that first and then come back here. Otherwise, let's dive right into it. Season 4 starts 6 years after the events of Season 3, where after the timeline has reset all over again, all of the members of the Academy have lost their powers. And so all the Hargrave siblings are now in other parts of the country, they're living their own mundane lives. But when it seems like something is about to go horribly wrong once again, that will threaten the end of the world, once again, they have to reunite and figure out what that's going to be and how to stop it. I really enjoyed the first 3 seasons of Umbrella Academy. I've read the comics and I've seen the show. I think the comics did some things great. I think the shows did some things great. I think there's a couple of decisions the show made which were for the better in comparison to the material. One of the biggest decisions that they made, which changed things dramatically, was at the end of Season 1, it ends very differently. And Victor doesn't get shot. That was something that was a big thing that happened in the comic, but that doesn't happen over here. Here it completely resets everything, and now we're in these shattered timelines where the end of the world was avoided but also not avoided, and it's resulted in a bit of a mess. And so this season, which is much shorter than the other 3 seasons, is essentially a way to wrap all of that up, try and bring that storyline to a close. And it leads to a season that is entertaining to watch. It's a very breezy, fun time, and it's great to see these characters again, and it's nice to spend time with them once again, get to see their story to the very end of it. But at the same time, this is also my least favorite season of the 4. I think in terms of the cohesiveness and in terms of the storytelling, this one is a very big drop compared to the other 3. And I think one of the reasons is that limited runtime that they all have. This is 6 episodes, but there's enough material in here for a 10-episode season. So I'm not really sure what happened which resulted in this. I don't know if there was a production issue or if there was a, budget constraint thing that happened, or was it a creative decision? But there are so many things that are brought up in this season that I would have liked to have seen a little more exploration of. And unfortunately, we don't really get to see that exploration. It results in a final season that, like I said, has its moments, but it can feel a little overloaded. The things that I do like, however, are once again, like I said, the cast. I think this is one impeccably chosen team. Everybody once again brings their A game, led by a fantastic Elliot Page once again, with some really great character beats and scenes interwoven in throughout. And whenever you get a chance to focus on those characters once again, you get some really, really great stuff. Some of my favorite subplots are where the characters are just spending time with one another, building relationships, because that is something that the show has done really well. It's a way to get us to obviously connect with the characters, but also give stakes to everything that's happening. You need something that anchors it down to why you love it, as watching it as much as you do, and more specifically, what makes you want to root for them in those situations. The action, once again, very crazy and bizarre, and the show does embrace those aspects of itself in that how insane the timelines are getting, and it's able to do some stuff with that remains equally as insane. The thing that happens in this season is that there's a group of people called the Keepers, and they now think that they're not in the right timeline. What has happened is that everything is colliding into one another, and there are remnants from other timelines making their way into the one that they're in right now. And so because of that, it leads to some very bizarre conversations and things that happen, and a lot of Easter eggs as well. There's a few things that come up which very much harken back to other things that you may have heard of. Like, for example, there's a point in this where the Armageddon situation involves a giant squid. It appears, and it's what eventually leads to everything else that follows. And if you've read Watchmen, there's a giant squid involved that brings about an Armageddon situation in New York. And so there is little references like that, things that bring things together, which those were nice little callbacks, I think. There's so many callbacks anyway when it comes to the Umbrella Academy, especially with the Academy itself. So much X-Men thrown in there. Doesn't help that Elliot Page was also in the X-Men series. But I like the fact that the show manages to deconstruct those things and flip them around and make something of itself. One thing that is noticeable though is that this is easily the most adult of the 4 seasons. There's a lot more in terms of violence over here. There's some pretty bloody stuff, and it's also surprisingly very heavy with the language. Like, a lot of uses of fuck in this. I was actually surprised about that because I was thinking back to the last few seasons. I said, yeah, was that there that much? Because it was definitely here a lot. I mean, these shows are not kids shows anyway, but like, the I don't know, just it has an edge up in some ways. Like, even right from the start till the very finish, it gets very, very gnarly at times, which I was actually quite impressed by at a couple of points. Like, some of the deaths are pretty much out there, body parts everywhere. So yeah, but like I said, where it does suffer is the storytelling, especially when it comes to Ben. Now, as you know, this is not the Ben that they knew. This is the Ben from the other timeline, from the Sparrows, and so there's obviously a disconnect over there, but in an attempt to get their powers back, he eventually ends up giving all of the members Marigold, which is something that was in season 3, as we discovered. And when they drink that, they all get their powers back, but Ben gets something a little more complicated. Eventually, he meets this girl, Jennifer, at a diner, and it turns out Jennifer has a counteracting element in her. And due to an incident in another timeline where Ben and Jennifer interacted and their powers fused together, eventually what has resulted in is that if they do that again, if they do that a lot, it's going to result in the cleanse, which is going to wipe out everything and it's going to annihilate it all. And that's something that the Keepers also believe in, and they want that to happen. And as the show is going on, you're following the storyline, but it's also merged with other storylines going on the side, some of which I found a little more interesting. There's an entire thing that happens with number 5 and with Lila as they find a subway system that leads to other timelines. And eventually they end up on this train for years and they end up forming a bit of a relationship. This was actually the most compelling part for me because it actually was some character work there, especially when it came to 5, who has been very distant compared to everything else that has happened in the last few seasons. And now he has a bit of a heart. He's like, no, we can be here. We can have a life for ourselves. But the inevitability of everything coming to an end is something that comes up pretty often in this season. And eventually that is what it leads to. And in that way, I think that the finale is something that I did like. I like the idea that in order to have everything stop, it all has to stop for good. And that means that whatever anomaly created the Hargraves siblings and everything that led to this moment, it all has to stop. And so it results in one big cataclysmic finale where they all sacrifice themselves, and eventually that merge of energy that happens between the cleanse and the other siblings, it wipes out everything, and it results in only one linear timeline. So that way the show ends, and I thought that was good. Like I said, though, it does take a long time to get there. There's also subplots in the middle that aren't particularly as effective as they can be because, again, we don't get too much time with them, particularly when it comes to the Keepers. Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally are handling that, which is honestly great casting. If you had asked me who are the 2 people who would be fit for this universe best, those are the 2 names I would have come up with a long time ago. I'm surprised it took this long, but yep, they made it to the final season, so it's great to see them. And there's also stuff going on between Diego and Lila and their marriage. Things aren't working out so well. There's stuff that's going on with the CIA, or is it not the CIA? And there's some subplot stuff over there, like as distractions for everything else. There's a few things that are just tossed in there. There's a whole thing with Klaus as well, where he has to pay off some debts and he gets involved in a whole side quest, which also, it really does take away from the urgency of some things. And so there's so much which is like happening in this final season, and you want to give closure to everything, but you don't have enough time. Even the whole storyline with Jennifer just feels like a lot at once, not enough time to really get to know her or to understand everything that led to this, just a few very, very quick scenes eventually culminating in what eventually happens. And so I think overall there could have been some work done in that department for sure. As it stands, I don't hate the season, not even close. I think it's a very fun watch and there's enough entertaining stuff in there. But I think as far as the 4 seasons go, this is a decided drop down. And while the other ones were A minus, A levels for me, this one isn't quite that. But it still ends, like I said, the final few minutes are pretty solid. I like the way the entire last bit wraps up. And so overall, there was that. But the journey to that point is definitely messy. I'm curious as to what the fans will think of this. If you're somebody who has followed the show up until this point, has read the comics, my personal point is I think it's fine. I think it's an overall just fine season of TV, and it just kind of ends the story, and that was the end of that. But it's been a great journey overall. I mean, I've really had a great time with these characters for the most part, and that is what does matter at the end also to me. I'm gonna give the Umbrella Academy Season 4 a B minus. It's fine. Like I said, it's just fine. That's where it lands up. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more videos very, very soon. There's a few more things coming up. Looking forward to sharing those. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe and enjoy the show.